What if the earliest Sumerian Anunnaki myths weren't stories of creation, but a chronicle of a terrifying defeat recorded on the ancient Babylonian clay tablets known as the Defeat of Enmeshara? Coiled deep within the slowly drifting tapestry of the celestial abyss, the distant starry forms of the seven demons of ancient Mesopotamian mythology wait patiently as eternal sentinels of the obsidian void. Bound to the luminous cluster of the Pleiades, their luminous bodies reveal provocative mysteries hidden within the intricate cosmic geometry unfolding around them. Yet long before such harmonious order was established in the legendary epic of the Enuma Elish, the cataclysmic events etched into this later artifact paint a vastly different and far more terrifying picture of our shared primordial history. Tonight, we drift far past the predictable rhythmic dance of the known stars, unearthing a long-forgotten epoch of the earliest Anunnaki gods, when the very fabric of existence was still wild, unformed, and hidden within the intricate cosmic geometry of the celestial abyss. When mortal eyes first gazed upward from the damp riverbanks of Sumerian antiquity, they understood these powerful entities simply as the formless and invisible breath of the supreme sky god An. Those ancient stargazers believed the roaming shadows were born from the turbulent currents of the highest heavens, cascading downward to break against the yielding earth goddess below. For generations, the early agricultural settlements accepted this concept, viewing the invisible tempests as a necessary wild counterweight to the pristine architecture of the divine assembly. But as the great mud brick empires deepened their roots across the fertile delta, a darker and more unsettling truth began to surface from the baked soil. Ancient scribes peering deeply into the lost shadows of deep time unraveled a far more tragic and violent genesis for these seven entities. Heavily guarded secrets preserved within the quietest corners of the fragrant tablet houses reveal that these wandering tempests possessed a profoundly rebellious ancestry. Fading cuneiform inscriptions pressed into ancient clay suggest their existence did not begin as mere wandering winds of the open wastelands. They were instead the furious and physical offspring of a completely different and long since forgotten ruler, he who commanded the darkest depths of the primeval world, long before the first sunrise. This startling revelation completely transforms the story of the storm demons from a tale of natural weather phenomena into a chilling chronicle of ultimate betrayal and cosmic warfare. Our journey takes us back through the deepest and most unsettled epochs of our primeval Earth. This was an incredibly distant era, long since lost to the farthest reaches of human memory, when the fragile boundaries of the universe were still raw and completely untamed by the familiar deities of later ages. The slow, comforting rhythm of the modern celestial rotation had not yet been calibrated, leaving the foundations of the world exposed to the harsh and volatile elements of the void. A displaced and much older generation of ancient Anunnaki gods ruled the cosmos with an uncompromising severity during this dark dawn of time. These primordial titans governed the vast expanses of creation, long before the very first human caretakers ever built their towering mud-brick temples. They were massive and unfathomable forces of raw nature, personifying the very elements which shaped barren continents with a slow and deliberate friction that shook the deepest bedrock of the earth. If you are listening to this in the still quiet of the night, let us know where and when you are joining us from in the comments section. It is quietly comforting to realize that countless listeners, scattered across distant lands and different time zones, are all settling into the same quiet journey through the forgotten echoes of human history. And if you are enjoying this Sumerian history for sleep narrative, finding it helps you relax or even drift off, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps support our efforts to keep bringing you these ancient stories each week, and continue reaching others who are searching for the same calm place to relax and unwind. If you would like uninterrupted sleep and longer versions, those are available to you through the Legends of the Dawn membership. Now we journey back to a time thousands of years ago, when there were no sweeping agricultural canals or protective city walls to establish any sense of order across the rocky terrestrial plains. Mortal life simply wasn't possible in a reality where such monolithic ancestors clashed endlessly over the ultimate control of the physical universe. The supreme authority of the heavens was held firmly in the heavy hands of these ancient rulers, who reigned entirely unchallenged in the deepest shadows. Heavy atmospheric storms raged continuously across the empty valleys, their deafening thunder echoing through the jagged mountain passes. The sweet freshwater oceans were still hidden beneath a thick crust of dense stone, waiting patiently for a divine architect to release their nourishing magic. Only the absolute strongest and most fearsome deities could survive the crushing pressure of this incredibly turbulent primordial wilderness. Beneath the cracked soil and the dry terrain, a colossal presence slumbered silently within the darkest reaches of the underworld. The chaotic shifting energy of the early earth was perfectly mirrored in his massive archaic form. This forgotten lord ruled over a desolate and shadowy kingdom, gathering the rawest elements of the universe to serve his absolute and unquestioned will. The sheer gravitational pull of his immense power kept the entire cosmic architecture firmly anchored to the lowest depths of the endless void. It was within this isolated and lightless environment that a profound and devastating new force began to slowly take its shape, one which would give a new name to the Seven Sebitti. But to truly understand their relentless fury, we must first descend into this lightless domain to meet their forgotten primeval father. Those darkest depths of our silent primordial earth reveal a forgotten ruler, known to ancient scholars as Enmesharra. He was an ancient sovereign whose very name carried the crushing weight of the deepest subterranean caverns and the blackest of midnight skies. In many fragmented mythological texts, he is viewed as a dormant ruler of the deep, often described as the paternal uncle of the great air god Enlil, an inactive predecessor to the familiar Anunnaki deities who would later guide the sprawling agricultural settlements. He existed as the lingering ghost of a displaced generation, who governed the raw cosmos before time itself began. His dominion was absolute and terrifying, creating a heavily suffocating atmosphere that permeated every hidden crevice of the early world. No light from the upper realms could penetrate the thick rocky ceiling of his subterranean fortress, leaving his dark sanctuary completely isolated from the turning ages. Translated humbly as the Lord of all the May, this supreme god of the underworld commanded the fundamental forces of all reality. He held absolute dominion over those sacred blueprints of early existence, long before the younger gods ever claimed the skies. He was the absolute master of those intricate celestial instructions, holding the raw fabric of the universe firmly within his shadowy grasp. His towering primordial form commanded a deep reverence from the ancient spirits who slumbered in the dusty abyss of this shrouded realm. Such immense power required fearsome companions to maintain his strict reign across the barren and endlessly shifting plains of the unformed earth. From the pitch-black isolation of this hidden kingdom, a chilling new generation of absolute terror was slowly and deliberately conceived. This towering father of the netherworld carefully forged 7 distinct vessels of pure devastation to act as the ultimate enforcers of his primeval authority. He fathered these terrifying suns directly from the raw and unsettled energies simmering quietly beneath the cracked soil. It is here that the 7 demons of Sumerian mythology would be bestowed new names, becoming known collectively as the 7 sons of Enmesharra. Every terrifying tempest that would later ravage the fertile river valleys was meticulously cultivated within the heavy silence of his subterranean kingdom. These incredibly powerful offspring were specifically designed to carry out his dark will, spreading his crushing influence throughout the endless cosmic void. They were fierce princes of the Underworld who inherited the immense gravity of their father, possessing an inherent and chaotic violence that perfectly mirrored the violently shifting earth of those earliest days. While their earliest Sumerian incarnations were perceived as entirely formless winds, this darker Babylonian tradition endowed them with a far more sinister presence. Slowly rising from the dark earth, they began to take on a more defined, yet still shadowy and shifting form. Horrifying silhouettes moved with a slow and deliberate malice that sent heavy tremors echoing through the deepest bedrock of the formative world. They gathered around their primeval father as his loyal companions, ready to enforce his absolute decrees across the expanding universe. This towering ancestor of the divine pantheon shaped his dark enforcers to thrive within the lightless boundaries of his deeply isolated subterranean realm. The sheer gravitational pull of their combined presence was enough to warp the fragile boundaries separating the earth from the sky above. This crushing weight fueled a malevolent and simmering hatred for the luminous world above, for they fed upon the very raw and unsettled energies of the early earth, drawing immense strength from the volatile tremors that shook its deepest foundations. Such a suffocating environment hardened their shifting silhouettes into formidable weapons of pure chaotic intent. They drifted through the cold underground corridors like an advancing plague, hungering constantly for the chaotic friction of a violent tempest. Ancient theologians understood that this displaced titan felt an agonizing resentment toward any force that might threaten his supreme and unquestioned rule. His 7 offspring were kept close to his towering throne, feeding their formless minds with his own bitter desire for eternal dominance. Early stargazers would eventually come to understand these shifting entities as the absolute pinnacle of untamed primordial destruction. Together they ruled the barren wastelands with an uncompromising severity, crushing any small spark of life that attempted to bloom in the dust. Their terrifying forms radiated an aura of paralyzing cold that withered the fragile roots of the earliest mountain ranges. These vicious siblings moved together as a single wave of devastation, blending the howling fury of the storm with the creeping dread of the abyss, and reveling in their unchecked authority. But as the great cosmic wheel slowly turned, a younger and more vibrant generation of gods rose to the forefront of the celestial assembly. These luminous new deities desired to bring radiant order to the universe, seeking to establish a flawlessly organized mathematical harmony to fertilize the barren wastelands. Their brilliant light began to pierce the heavy shadows of the void, directly challenging the ancient supremacy of the underworld titan. Led by ambitious young champions like the mighty air god Enlil, who, born from the unending pressures of the sky god An and the earth goddess Ki, separated his parents' embrace to create space for the new pantheon, which now sought to claim the holy May for themselves. They wished to reshape the chaotic wilderness into a peacefully blooming garden, preparing the world for the eventual arrival of moral inhabitants. But they knew perfectly well that this ancient titan and his 7 ferocious sons would not surrender the authority of their grand dominion peacefully. The universe now hovered on the precipice of a catastrophic confrontation, a cosmic clash between the deeply entrenched obscurity of the past and the bright promise of a newly awakened dawn. Tensions between the displaced older generation and the vibrant younger deities continued to escalate, sending invisible shockwaves across the silent plains. This impending war of supreme authorities would forever alter the delicate balance of the entire natural world. The brutal legacy of Enmesharra's ancient reign would eventually spill upward, carrying a suffocating wave of destruction that threatened to erase the very stars themselves. Those 7 ferocious princes of the darkest chasms would rise with it, shattering the peaceful equilibrium of the heavenly assembly. An unimaginably violent rebellion was quietly brewing within the deep earth, preparing to plunge the highest luminous shrines back into absolute darkness. The young and radiant deities of the heavens would soon be forced to defend their gleaming domains against the most terrifying forces the universe had ever known. The ancient silence of the unformed world was slowly breaking under the steady arrival of this bright new era. Ambitious deities worked to structure the wilds into a beautiful tapestry of calculable symmetry, efforts which directly threatened the dark supremacy of the primeval underworld. At the forefront of this vibrant celestial assembly was the mighty air god Enlil, alongside a brilliant young champion known as Marduk. To the earlier Sumerian populations, this rising hero was originally revered as Asagku, the wise aquatic son of the water god Enki. Later Babylonian scholars would seamlessly weave his esoteric magic into the singular and towering identity of their own supreme creator. Together, these luminous architects began to push back the suffocating shadows with immense structures of pure celestial light. Their magnificent guiding magic began to filter down through the dense rock, disturbing the ancient rest of Enmesharra. The displaced Titan felt the heavy foundations of his absolute dominion slowly slipping into the hands of these radiant usurpers. Unwilling to quietly surrender his eternal kingdom to this vibrant new pantheon, he summoned his terrifying offspring from the darkness. The 7 shadowy princes gathered swiftly around his throne, eagerly listening to his bitter commands. His broiling resentment flowed over into a furious vow to reclaim the vast universe, devising a great insurrection which would keep it eternally suspended in the everlasting shadows of their ancient abyss. This monumental uprising marked the absolute shattering of the fragile cosmic stillness that had briefly blanketed the early earth. The towering lord of the deep unleashed his 7 ferocious sons to wage a catastrophic insurrection against the shining heavens above. They surged upward from the lightless caverns as a unified and devastating wave of pure, malicious intent. Raw and unbridled forces of the deep earth crashed violently against the pristine boundaries of the new celestial order. The 7 siblings hurled themselves into the upper atmosphere to extinguish the brilliant shrines of the young divine assembly. Their shadowy and shifting forms blotted out the comforting light of the stars as they spread a terrifying shroud of blackness across the once glittering canopy. Ancient earthen records portray this fierce clash as a blinding collision of 2 completely incompatible cosmic eras. The heavy and suffocating gravity of the primordial void wrestled aggressively against the enlightening and purifying logic of the new divine creators. Deafening shockwaves of this celestial conflict echoed throughout the deepest mountain valleys, permeating every crevasse and shaking the foundational pillars of creation itself. These darkened forces fought with a relentless malice to dismantle the careful architecture ushered in by the heavenly assembly. They wrapped their freezing winds and paralyzing shadows tightly around the gleaming celestial domains to suffocate their brilliant light. The entire universe trembled as the untamed essence of the primordial wilderness attempted to swallow the fragile seeds of structured civilization. The seven brothers moved flawlessly as one massive storm of devastation to rip the delicate fabric of reality apart. They fed upon the panicked friction of the cosmos to grow increasingly massive and dense against the black expanse. Their shadowy silhouettes cast a paralyzing cold that withered the first fresh blooms of the newly ordered earthly garden. The younger gods stood their ground upon shimmering platforms to counter this massive assault with profound divine reasoning. Marduk wielded the esoteric and restorative magic of his ancient Sumerian father, carving luminous pathways through the creeping shadows. Blinding flares of solar energy were hurled into the dark insurrection in an attempt to violently scatter the suffocating density of the tempests. It was a deeply terrifying spectacle, where the raw malice of the underworld met an impenetrable shield of pure heavenly brilliance. The swiftly shifting silhouettes of the seven siblings eventually began to recoil as the glowing incantations of the sky struck their murky forms. Yet they continued their relentless siege with a bitter determination to honor the sinister will of their primeval father. The cosmic war raged endlessly across the heavens, while the earth itself cowered in the unpredictable darkness. To break the relentless onslaught of these ferocious shadows, the celestial assembly called upon another fierce and uncompromising champion of their own. They turned to the fearsome underworld warrior known as Nergal, who was later deeply associated with the volatile Sumerian god, Erra. This formidable deity possessed a unique mastery over the darkest and most turbulent energies of the lower realms. He stepped bravely into the celestial battlefield to confront the mutiny of the ancient Titan and his 7 demonic sons. The combined radiant power of the younger Anunnaki pantheon rallied behind his terrifying and uncompromising advance into the mutinous cabal. The 7 ruthless storm demons howled with all-consuming fury as they clashed with the heavily armed defender of the sky. Their chaotic winds battered against his impenetrable divine armor in a desperate endeavor to break the shining line of the new celestial order. The heavens were completely engulfed in a blinding maelstrom of colliding cosmic forces that threatened to unmake the very fabric of existence. As the devastating battle wore on, the sheer intellect of the luminous gods began to outmaneuver the raw malice of the underworld. The 7 princes found their shifting shadows pierced repeatedly by the flawless geometry of the most powerful archaic spells. Their suffocating density began to slowly dissolve under the crushing weight of such supreme magic. Entrenched in the volatile epicenter of this cosmic clash, the ancient Titan, Enmesharra, watched alongside his abyssal brood, as the tide of the great cosmic war began to permanently turn against his dark offspring. The glorious light of the young deities poured relentlessly through the fractured ranks of the tempestuous demons to illuminate the deepest corners of the void. Large fractures began to permeate throughout his absolute dominion over the universe, broken by the harmonious strength of the new world. Facing this unified and brilliant retaliation of the younger gods, the dark forces of the underworld finally began to falter. The primeval lord found his immense gravitational pull completely overwhelmed by the flawless and structurally organizing magic of the luminous heavens. His 7 demonic sons found their chaotic winds trapped within the inescapable and blinding boundaries of their luminescence. A profoundly heavy stillness began to return to the torn and fractured edges of the upper atmosphere. The towering primeval father and his dark enforcers were captured, their catastrophic attempt to reclaim the universe reaching a sudden and devastating end under the watchful eyes of the stars. The scattered remnants of the chaotic tempest were swiftly contained by the strengthened grip of their victors. Brilliant light once again returned to wash over the terrified terrestrial plains. A sweeping sense of absolute security was restored to the ancient world as the dust of the cosmic war slowly settled, coming to rest in the dark soil which waited patiently to be molded into sprawling metropolises of mortal ambition in the eras yet to come. The children of Enmesharra now faced the absolute and uncompromising authority of the radiant champions. A solemn hush fell over the great divine assembly as they prepared to decide the ultimate fate of the vanquished under their newly established hierarchy. The turning wheel of the cosmos settled into a cold and terrifying silence as a monumental celestial judgment drew near. Ancient earthen records reveal that the divine gods of the shining heavens did not simply extinguish the life of this defeated underworld titan. Instead, he was violently stripped of his absolute cosmic authority and permanently banished from the warm protective light of the terrestrial planes. Cast down into the absolute blackness of the deepest subterranean caverns to lie dormant in the silent, obscure shadows for all eternity. His ancient underworld sanctuary that had once served as the absolute center of primeval creation was transformed into an inescapable and eternal prison capable of holding his immense presence. He was strictly forbidden from ever reaching out to touch the warming rays of the sun or feel the sweet rushing currents of the great rivers. Locked safely away from the slow turning of the planetary spheres, he became a dormant and ghostly ruler of the silent abyss. His towering primeval essence slowly faded into the lingering phantom of a dark epoch that the vibrant universe preferred to forget entirely. This total isolation ensured that his chaotic influence could never again rise to disrupt the beautifully ordered architecture of this new era. Generations of early mortals would eventually walk across the lush green river valleys without any knowledge of his terrifying primeval reign. His distant memory would be lost to the ever-changing tides of human history as the elevated cosmic order blossomed high above. With their primeval father banished permanently to the shadows, a deeply chilling and horrific fate awaited his 7 defeated children. The shadowy princes of the deep were swiftly captured by the fierce underworld warrior known to ancient priests as Nergal. This terrifying defender gathered the seized entities together, escorting them upward through the clouds for a monumental and highly anticipated celestial judgment. They were dragged forcefully from the rocky crust of the earth and brought directly before the supreme and radiant champion, Marduk. Recovered fragments of ancient mythology reveal a dark and shocking betrayal that ultimately sealed the destiny of these wandering primeval storms. In a desperate attempt to buy his own eternal safety, their father was said to have willingly handed his 7 sons over to the very hands of their divine executioners. Without a single moment of hesitation, Enmesharra offered his loyal dark companions as a fitting sacrifice to appease the vengeful wrath of the victorious heavenly assembly, who now sought retribution. The 7 rebellious siblings waited silently before the glowing celestial throne, entirely abandoned by the primeval father they had fought so fiercely to protect. They faced their steadfast authority without any lingering hope of ever returning to the familiar comfort of their otherworldly home. As Nergal brought these prisoners of war forward, Marduk looked down upon them, those savage weapons of the great insurrection, becoming consumed in a sudden violent fit of uncontrollable divine rage. The young god of esoteric magic raised his radiant weapons to deliver a swift and terrifying punishment, violently beheading the 7 created demons of the abyss in a spectacular resolution that sent resounding shockwaves rippling downward throughout the sleeping terrestrial planes. This brutal and sacrificial death completely destroyed the shifting physical forms of those arrogant princes of the deep. Yet the untamed essence of their primordial spirits proved far too deeply ingrained within the fabric of creation to be completely erased from the natural world. The raw, chaotic energy of the early earth simply refused to be entirely extinguished by the bright and purifying logic of the organized heavens. The victorious Anunnaki deities peered into their lingering shadows and recognized a profound cosmic necessity for this lingering destructive power. They understood that their beautifully ordered universe still required a terrifying natural counterweight to properly maintain the absolute balance of reality. A flawless celestial harmony could only survive if the heavens possessed the ultimate capacity to cleanse the delicate earth with unchecked devastation whenever the turning ages required a massive correction. Instead of banishing these wandering spirits altogether, the supreme creators decided to permanently alter the very nature of their existence. The dark essences of the brothers were violently assimilated into the more familiar and terrifying class of entities known as the Seven Sebitti, or the Asagku demons. They were completely stripped of their royal heritage, transformed into mindless weapons of ultimate cosmic war to be wielded by the highest authorities. All the formless malice of the deepest abyss was methodically compressed into a singular edge of focused destruction. The gods recognized that holding such a devastating threat over the terrestrial planes would guarantee a lasting submission to their newly established order. These once proud princes of the dark were securely bound into eternal servitude beneath the radiant hierarchy of the sky. The luminous deities locked their tempestuous souls away within the deepest corners of the starry vault, contained within the Pleiades constellation to serve as a slumbering celestial arsenal for a reimagined god of war. They waited patiently in the darkness until the slow turning of the ages required their unbridled forces once again. Despite their defeat, the mysterious legacy of these enigmatic entities would live on for countless generations, continually unraveled and reimagined by later mythological traditions, such as those contained within the epic of Erra and Isham. Their harsh transformation perfectly bridged the forgotten epoch of the earliest Titans with the highly structured reign of the newly established gods. They were now subjugated by the exact same luminous deities they had sought so passionately to rebel against. The supreme sky god An had carefully remolded their abstract forms into highly tangible and terrifying physical manifestations. These diverse elements of devastation were tightly bound together into one unified cabal that was perfectly designed to execute the bitter will of the heavens. Solidifying their status as the ultimate counterbalance of the universe, they combined the paralyzing aura of terror and scorching heat of unquenchable cosmic fires with the raging tempest of old, all standing side by side along with the ferocious lion, the corrosive venom of the serpent, sheer brute strength, and an inescapable force. To ensure this tremendous power was kept in its proper place, An specifically designated these 7 weapons to the volatile deity Erra, a restless and unpredictable god of war and plague, who was previously associated with the fierce underworld warrior known to ancient priests as Nergal. An handed the terrifying arsenal over to this dark champion with a very specific and powerful decree that would forever alter the fate of reality. This great father of the gods commanded Erra, "Let them go beside you. When the clamor of human habitations becomes noisome to you, and you resolve to wreak destruction, let these be your fierce weaponry." This formal assignment officially bound the 7 demons into an eternal and unbreakable servitude to the great Anunnaki gods. Tucked safely away within the deepest corners of the starry vault, the heavy weapons of the Sebitti began to slowly rust and tarnish without use. Centuries of forced servitude and stagnant peace settled heavily upon their broad shoulders. They lamented deeply over this creeping decay, reflecting their growing and inherently insatiable bloodlust after such a prolonged period of silence. But at some point during this immensely long era of heavenly restraint, the booming industrial noise of human civilization had spread far and wide over the rolling Mesopotamian plains. Mortal laborers had successfully cultivated the once barren earthly domain into a bountiful and thriving agricultural paradise that hummed with restless energy. Sweeping canals and towering temple platforms stretched endlessly across the green valleys, ushering a beautifully synchronized symphony of primeval terrestrial progress. The sweet fragrance of blooming orchards now mingled seamlessly with the rich aroma of melting copper, as sprawling mud brick cities multiplied across the fertile delta. Early humanity experienced an unprecedented zenith of expansion that pushed the fragile boundaries of the natural world to their absolute limits. Dense and overcrowded neighborhoods buzzed with the frantic and deafening hum of a mortal population that had grown far too large for its own high earthen walls. Such unbroken peace and unchecked progress can easily turn into the dangerous complacency of a world that threatens to overtake its intended parameters. The loud and rhythmic sound of these unfurling terrestrial settlements echoed upward into the starry vault, constantly disturbing the resting spirits of the dark vanguard. Driven entirely mad by the flourishing clamor of mankind, the Seven Sebitti began to crave the chaotic friction of their primordial past even more intensely. Unable to unleash their fury without the decree of their commanding master, the restless shadows gathered closely around the throne of the plague god. They began whispering treacherous and seductive flattery directly into the eager ears of Erra, inciting another violent rebellion against the heavens. The silver-tongued demons actively manipulated his divine pride, mocking him for remaining so idle while the human population multiplied, completely ignoring his tremendous cosmic power. Their venomous whispers slowly poisoned his already envious heart and convinced him that the ultimate authority over the universe rightfully belonged to the forces of chaos. Goaded relentlessly by these demonic weapons, the volatile god of war began to formulate a highly cunning plot to betray the supreme creator. He desired to completely usurp the absolute command of Marduk and plunge the beautifully structured world back into the deafening roar of primordial turmoil. Erra knew perfectly well that a direct physical assault against the reigning king of the gods would surely end in his own immediate ruin. Claiming the highest celestial throne required a much more subtle approach, built entirely upon an elegant and flawless deception. Gathering the creeping shadows of the void around him like a heavy cloak, the plague god prepared to step out from the darkness and approach the radiant capital of Babylon. Here, the ultimate prize of this treacherous scheme resided under the careful guidance of the new king of all gods, the legendary radiant tablet of Destinies, which rested securely upon the proud chest of Marduk. This heavy clay ledger served as the supreme symbol of the flawless order that governed the carefully structured celestial reigns. Whoever possessed this magnificent earthen artifact held the absolute power to dictate the precise fates of both the immortal pantheon and all living creatures occupying terrestrial planes below. Erra ascended slowly toward the magnificent mud-brick sanctuary of Babylon, and stepped softly into those high luminous halls to find the supreme champion resting peacefully upon his elevated celestial throne in the temple of Asagku. The cunning antagonist bowed his head in a carefully hidden gesture of mock reverence, and offered beautifully crafted words of false admiration to cleverly point out that countless passing centuries had quietly stolen the once blinding luster from his sacred royal garments. He expounded upon this slow deterioration with masterful sorrow, to weave an intoxicating spell of pure vanity around the proud and unsuspecting king of the gods. This dark visitor suggested that long years of dedicated oversight had inadvertently drained the vital energy from his holy vestments. He gently proposed that Marduk should temporarily leave his watchful post to seek absolute purification deep within the subterranean fresh waters of the Apsu. A thorough cleansing within those rejuvenating currents would easily wash away the accumulated worldly dust and restore his pure, blinding aura of supreme command. Erra assured his host that such a brief departure would cause absolutely no harm to the eternal turning of the great cosmic wheel. He vowed to stand as a loyal guardian over the empty halls and maintain the flawless alignment of the wandering stars until the king returned. This articulate deception resonated beautifully within the tired mind of the high god and completely obscured the truly sinister motive lurking just beneath this friendly facade. Easily swayed by such a masterful psychological manipulation, the proud king of the gods agreed to temporarily step away from his heavy cosmic duties. He slowly unfastened the glowing ledger of universal fates and left its immense power completely unprotected upon a cold stone altar within the temple walls. This fateful departure allowed Erra to swiftly take absolute control of the Tablet of Destinies and the delicate cosmic order it so carefully commanded. A terrifying silence instantly swept across the upper atmosphere as the volatile new master claimed the highest authority of the sky. Sitting proudly upon the deserted throne, Erra embraced his new power and quickly turned his dark attention toward those 7 demonic warriors of destruction. The beautiful harmony of the ancient cosmos was about to be shattered by an unprecedented and merciless deluge of pure, unadulterated chaos. Unrestrained by the benevolent oversight of Marduk, the newly crowned master of the sky gazed eagerly upon the unprotected terrestrial plains with sinister anticipation. He clutched the unguarded ledger tightly against his chest to permanently sever the peaceful harmony that had sheltered the ancient world for countless generations before. With a single devastating command, he unleashed the 7 Sebitti from their heavenly prison to ravage the sleeping agricultural empires resting blindly below the starry vault. Those terrifying weapons of Erra eagerly rushed downward from the deepest corners of the night sky, executing their bitter destinies across the fragile earthly garden. They hurled their shifting, shadowy forms through the cold upper atmosphere with an insatiable bloodlust that had been festering silently throughout many long centuries. The protective cosmic tapestry completely shattered under the sheer physical weight of their terrifying descent into the vulnerable mortal realm. Ancient scribes recorded this apocalyptic event not as the physical deluge of rushing sweet water which had ravaged the plains of early Sumeria, but as a metaphorical flood of absolute societal inversion and pervasive creeping dread. Instead of sweeping ocean tides, the ferocious demons unleashed a relentless tidal wave of civil war and sudden pestilence across the once flourishing pathways of the fertile delta. A once pristine order was violently swallowed by the suffocating tide of sheer madness that spared absolutely no one in its wake. A terrifying sickness swept rapidly throughout the vibrant winding avenues, draining all vital living energy from the exhausted laborers of the great Mesopotamian plains. The righteous and unrighteous alike were slaughtered indiscriminately, as the sacred laws of the universe were intentionally wiped from human memory. Parents turned violently against their own children in the dusty streets, causing the carefully structured harmony of mankind to unravel into an agonizingly bitter state of total panic. The sprawling agricultural geometry that once nourished the flourishing ancient empires completely shattered under the heavy shadow of this unnaturally erratic storm. Golden fields of blooming wheat withered and dematerialized into dry, lifeless dust, while the deep irrigation canals choked on the crumbling ruins of early civilization. Towering mud brick sanctuaries slowly began to fall apart as the usual daily rituals of divine devotion were quickly abandoned by a terrified and scattering population. Feral predators left the unbridled boundaries of faraway lands, roaming freely through the empty city squares of magnificent terrestrial capitals. The eerie presence of these thirsty beasts stalking through the deserted market avenues symbolized the ultimate triumph of the archaic wilderness, over-structured earthly order. Our precarious universe was plunged directly back into the deafening roar of primeval chaos that permeated the atmosphere long before the dawn of mankind. The deafening clamor of utter ruin now swallowed the soothing melodies of temple musicians. Blackened skies mirrored the absolute despair echoing throughout the winding valleys below, as the sweet waters of the Euphrates River ran thick with the heavy debris of fallen monuments. The magnificent architectural achievements of early humanity were ground down into scattered fragments of baked clay to be swallowed endlessly by the encroaching desert sands. Amidst this blinding whirlwind of cosmic devastation, a single voice of moral reason stepped bravely out from the gathering darkness to challenge the falling heavens. This was the wise and level-headed herald of the night, Isham, who served as the loyal vizier and constant companion to the volatile plague god. He witnessed the indiscriminate suffering tearing across the Mesopotamian landscape, and felt a profound pity for the weeping earth as it crumbled under the sheer weight of such divine arrogance. Isham approached his enraged master without drawing any heavy copper weapons or preparing for a violent physical confrontation within those stolen luminous halls. He understood perfectly well that using brute force against the raging god of war would only multiply his rampant destruction. This gentle counselor relied entirely upon the highly sophisticated magic of eloquent language to pacify the roaring tempest which clouded the mind of his superior. Isham paced softly across the deserted throne room to weave a masterful web of soothing flattery around the swollen ego of Erra. He spoke with a deeply resonant voice to respectfully acknowledge that the plague god had successfully proven his absolute dominion over the entire world, reminding him that every living creature now truly feared his terrifying cosmic might and unrivaled physical strength as the ultimate architect of destruction. Isham gently reasoned that a total annihilation of the terrestrial planes would leave no mortal caretakers behind to worship his ultimate display of unyielding power, painting a desolate picture of empty, silent temples where sweet incense would never again burn to honor his victorious conqueror of the skies. This articulate persuasion slowly penetrated the blinding fury of the war god, offering a more logical path toward a sustainable eternal glory. Charmed completely by this masterful psychological diplomacy, the proud deity finally allowed his simmering rage to subside into a gently pacified satisfaction. Erra commanded the 7 demons to cease their merciless onslaught and immediately retreat back into the hidden shadows of the ether. The violent churning energy of the Sebitti was brought under strict control to allow the surviving human populations to breathe freely once more under a clearing sky. A heavy restorative silence once again fell over the fractured mud-brick cities as the weary survivors slowly emerged from the dusty ruins of their former lives. This long and terrible nightmare of unchecked violence washed away to reveal a fragile new dawn breaking softly over the recovering green valleys. Humanity now fully recognized the terrifying power of these dark cosmic forces and searched desperately for a way to secure their future protection against the unknown. The catastrophic era of this metaphorical deluge left an indelible scar upon the collective memory of the ancient world as they rebuilt their shattered society. Ancient priests working within the fragrant tablet houses realized that the overwhelming malice of the seven demons could be redirected through the careful application of esoteric magic. This profound theological awakening would soon inspire a brilliant historical twist to permanently safeguard the thresholds of their newly restored homes from the wandering shadows of the night. The overwhelming power of the seven storm demons would come to be respected as the ultimate forces of the natural world. Later, Assyrian and Babylonian priests learned to carefully redirect this wild energy to create an enduring and magical layer of protection for their people. They began crafting small clay figurines in the mysterious forms of those seven wandering entities to safeguard the quiet sanctuaries. Dedicated artisans working in the deeply shadowed courtyards of the great temples molded the damp river mud into highly detailed protective talismans. Every subtle feature was smoothed by a hand to capture the imposing nature of these ancient tempests without inviting their untamed wrath back into the terrestrial planes. These earthen vessels were then baked slowly in warm kilns until the esoteric magic was permanently locked into solid clay embodiments. Families living across the sprawling settlements would carefully carry these small statues back to the soothing comfort of their own humble dwellings. They buried the clay talismans directly beneath their floorboards and just inside the thresholds of their heavy wooden doorways. This hidden presence in the earth acted as a powerful and unseen ward against any unknown forces waiting outside the city walls. Their imposing earthen forms stood silently in the deep soil to drive away the shadows of the wilderness. Ancient Mesopotamians found a profound psychological comfort in knowing that the fierce power of the storm was now standing guard over their sleeping families, allowing them to rest securely through the longest and quietest hours of the night. But the magnificent legacy of these enigmatic entities would not remain confined to the silent soil of the rolling plains. Ancient astronomers peered deeply into the velvet expanse above to perfectly map their dual nature within the highest and most luminous celestial spheres. The eternally guiding knowledge of the Mulapin permanently recorded these seven sentinels into the very fabric of the heavens, where their immense power would be traced to the glittering cluster of distant lights turning slowly and peacefully overhead. Securely hidden within the shimmering embrace of the starry constellation of the Pleiades, this precise mathematical mapping ensured that the ancient memory of the seven tempests would gracefully survive the long and sweeping turning of the ages. High above the quiet river valleys, these starry sentinels continue their endless rotation through the softly welcoming blanket of the night. Their mesmerizing and hypnotic twinkling casts a pale, silvery glow over the restored landscape, beautifully reflecting their transformation into the ultimate silent protectors of the cosmos. A reassuring and comforting stillness settles into the winding avenues of those ancient mud-brick cities with the rising moon. The faint and sweet scent of blooming orchards drifts lazily across empty courtyards to mingle with the refreshingly cool river breeze. Those distant points of light stand shoulder to shoulder to keep a constant, watchful vigil over the dreaming world. The gentle rhythm of the turning universe hums with a deeply resounding resonance that gently washes away all lingering traces of conscious thought. We are wrapped completely in the absolute security of a cosmos that operates in flawless and beautiful mathematical harmony. The unhurried, majestic dance of distant luminous bodies offers a silent promise that the earth remains perfectly guarded under their eternal guidance. Sinking further and further into this profound sense of tranquility, the tangible boundaries of ancient settlements slowly dissolve into the ether. We drift peacefully away to join the stars, surrendering completely to the comforting embrace of the star-speckled celestial seas.